Right, this is the translation of the story Trasimene. If you haven't translated this yet, or if you've spent about 5 minutes attempting to translate it, pause this video, step away from the computer, go and do the translation properly, and then come back and watch this. If you have translated the story, then make sure you're following where I'm getting my translation from, that you're checking every tense and case of each word, that you've got that right. And if you haven't, it's not a problem, but make sure you recognise how not to make the same mistakes again, especially when it comes to the summer exam. Okay, let's start. So Flaminius is provoked into fighting despite bad omens. The Romans are led into a trap and suffer a crushing defeat at Lake Trasimene in 217 BC. Okay, the Romans, because they had been conquered in 2 battles, so victi erant here, if you translated that as were conquered, it's not quite right because that will be victi sunt. Remember, the perfect passive verb is the PPP plus sum as est, but the pluperfect passive verb is the PPP plus eram eras erat. So the Romans, because they had been conquered in 2 battles, were now afraid to fight with the Carthaginians, or were now fearing to fight with the Carthaginians. Hannibal, however, who knew sciebat being imperfect, but obviously it sounds a bit strange if you say who was knowing, so feel free to translate it as the perfect tense. So who knew, and then you've got an accusative followed by an infinitive. So even though it's quite a long phrase, this is an indirect statement. So who knew that Flaminius, the Roman consul, was a bold and boastful man. Okay, remember esse is the present infinitive, but sciebat is in the past. So that means esse needs to be plonked back into the past. So instead of translating it as is, you're translating it as was. So Hannibal, however, who knew that Flaminius, the Roman consul, was a bold and boastful man, decided to provoke him. Therefore, he set fire to farms. He destroyed fields. If you put an and in the middle there, that's fine. We've mentioned this before, quite often Latin will miss the and out, but in English it will sound a bit better if you put it in. Okay, next sentence. Flaminius, when he saw these things, at once wanted to fight. I bet that lots of you have translated hike as this, but this suggests a singular. Hike, remember, is quite often a neuter plural pronoun. So we always bag on about how neuter plurals end in a, but when it's the word hic, meaning this, the neuter plural version of that, for whatever reason, is hike. So that actually says when he saw these things. I think in an exam, if you put this, that would count as a minor error. So that means if you made that mistake and another mistake, within a sentence or a phrase, then you would lose a mark. So it's best just translating it accurately. But it's not the worst mistake you could have made. So Flaminius, when he saw these things, at once wanted to fight. He climbed onto his horse. His horse fell. Flaminius also fell. And then Iactos, a PPP, having been thrown over the head of his horse. So a strange little sentence there, kekidit, used twice. If we were analysing this like we do in literature, we talk about how it's repeated it for emphasis. And yeah, it's the perfect tense of cado, I fall. So a strange principal part, there's cado, cadere, kekidi, and then the PPP is casus, which wouldn't make a lot of sense, because why would you want to say having been fallen? But anyway, we'll move on from that. And then caput is the accusative after the preposition super. So it looks the same as the nominative caput, and that's because it's a neuter noun, and nominatives and accusatives for neuter nouns always look the same. And then equi there is your genitive. Okay, moving on. He ordered the military standards to be moved. So you've got your passive infinitive there, moveri. Signa, it tells you in the vocab. Signum is a military standard, and this is a neuter plural. And then moving on, the military standards clung or stuck in the ground. Heiserant, lovely verb. You quite often see it in Latin stories. Actually, quite often things are clinging to things and sticking to things. Okay. The next sentence contains a deponent verb. So we've got the gods at the start, dei, and then videbanter. So remember, video, obviously, I see. And video is quite often the deponent verb, I seem. So the gods seemed to warn Flaminius about a danger. The rest of the Roman leaders tried to warn him. Another deponent verb, conati sunt. So this looks like a PPP plus sunt, which would be a perfect passive verb. But because we know conor, I try, is deponent, it's just a perfect normal verb. Flaminius, however, didn't want to listen. At last, another deponent, he set out with his soldiers. The Romans, another deponent verb, followed Hannibal to Trasimene. There was, erat, a way, a path between the mountains and the water. The Romans, and this time we've got just a normal perfect passive verb because we know duco isn't deponent. So the Romans were led into narrow passageways by the Carthaginians, who had hidden, celaverant pluperfect, the cavalry, or knights or horsemen, not horses because that's equus, equites is your cavalry. So who had hidden cavalry in the mountains, montibus there being ablative plural. Hannibal suddenly attacked the Romans in the mist. Very many perierunt, perished, died, and the consul himself. So if you want to rearrange that, so it's very many and the consul himself died. Many who escaped were captured, perfect passive, capti sunt, afterwards by the enemy. The Romans, another deponent, passi erant from patio, I suffer. So the Romans had suffered, because erant instead of sunt makes it pluperfect. The Romans had suffered a very serious, a very heavy disaster.